Talk. Well, welcome, FearTalk. This is Jan Sheppard here from Vancouver. R. Michael Fisher here in Calgary, Alberta, and I started the FearTalk series probably about 6-8 months ago. Idea was really to try and have conversations with people on the topic of fear that extend the topic of fear itself and grow a new way of looking, thinking, relating, theorizing, philosophizing. There's just wide open, and Jan I've known for quite a while, and I really appreciate the last conversations we've had, and I'll put links below to those conversations on Fear Talks with you, Jan. And that today we're going to do the same thing, kind of popcorn style. I know you have some interest. You sent me a wonderful email just the other day, and I went, okay, how could I resist that? That's the email I've been waiting for in these times, quarantine time, coronavirus pandemic time, in at least the last 3 weeks here in North America, that we really felt the full impact of that dilemma. And I just want to just say that email that you sent me, and I know you'll describe what's in it to some degree. It is really, truly, as someone who's a fear researcher, as long as I have been, people just don't ask those kind of questions. It's absolutely amazing and astounding to me. They know my work. They know my specialty, my topic, and that question of curiosity to really dive in is amazingly just not present in the discourse. So you can see, like, the fear talk isn't at that level. It's not in the culture, not even in the most educated people I know, and even people who write and study fear. So you're coming to us certainly from the field of not only a long journey, but your trauma background as a therapist, I think probably tells me exactly why you want to stick your nose into this cultural trauma that we're going through right now. So over to you, Jan. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Michael. Well, what has been coming up now in this age of this pandemic and this crisis, and all the gathering and space that's being created, some things have been arising. And I was kind of on an evening looking at the full moon, and I didn't get my friends out howling yet. That's on the to-do list, but it just got me thinking. It was a great contemplation space to think about fear. Where am I at in my development of my relationship with fear? And for decades, I've been working with fear in my body, in my emotional makeup, and how does fear relate to anger, relate to sadness, etc., and fear collectively, and the systems and fear management systems. And I have other teachers I work with that talk about managing fear management systems that just suppress fear, and as well. And so I'm getting these ideas and these moving on to these, wanting to have more thought-provoking conversations about, if we use the spiral dynamics integral model, second-tier fear management. Like, what does second-tier fear management look like? And then what does second-tier, what would it look like in second tier if a fear management system of the second tier were integrated? Because we don't just like get rid of it so that we can be all developed and healed and all better. It's not about getting rid of it, right? It's about integrating it and presencing it so that it is not in the background, in a shadow, motivating, highly motivating, but very hard to trace, very hard to track. So a fear management system on second tier, and then a second tier system that is has a healthy relationship with fear systems. So I want to look at the systems, not the individual work. We got loads of that individual.
Oh, yeah.
Everywhere. Everybody's talking about how I feel fear in my body and you feel fear and you blah, 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 blah. So fear systems is much rarer, and especially around the collective, in not just the sociological, not just the outer systems, but also the inner relationships, so cultures. And I don't mean just nationalism, because that's a real virus in the US and in other countries of late. So anyway, I want to look at second tier fear systems, fear management systems, and what would that look like integrated. Mm-hmm. And all we would be doing is visioning and imagining, because I don't know that there is one.
Yeah, I suspect we'll probably do a series of talks on this. Today will be, fairly limited, and that's fine, because we're going to start. And just to let viewers know that this is probably a sequence that you want to be following, because we are going to talk about, in the sense of systems and how important that is we're talking about complex relationships, right?
Yeah.
Complex networks of relations.
Yes.
And sometimes I'll even use the word ecologies of fear. Right? Because there are these complex networks, and there's ecologies and dynamics, right? This is where dynamic therapy or dynamic psychologies, dynamic thinking, process thinking, etc. It has to be dynamic enough to get as many of the pieces in, right? Those interacting factors and elements to want a bigger, more complete picture. So the moment you say second tier, simple language that we're interpreting from integral theory, etc., spiral dynamics theory, is we're really talking about networks of complex interactions. What are those dynamics going on in those systems, so that we can analyze those, not just intellectually either, but we do need to have some kind of intellectual frameworks, right? Yes. Which we often call theory, that helps inform practices. And that interaction of theory and practice is praxis. That's the word that's been around a long time. What is our critical praxis in regard to fear development, fear management? So this is a rare conversation, and it's one that I think we have to have, because what we're seeing now with the pandemic, before I go further in, is just to say we are seeing systems upon systems of both collapsing, reacting, and in some ways we're actually getting to watch exactly how the world works. When you put it, is that any different than someone who's finally really traumatized for the first time in their life? In other words, they've had a really good life, and it was going pretty good, and that was together, and this worked out, and then they come in at some point, right? Because they finally had that major crisis, and sometimes people literally shut down.
Yeah. Complete collapse.
I'm talking about really competent people, right? Fairly looking competent systems, adaptive, put under the right conditions, and boom, unpredictable results in many cases, sometimes maybe not so unpredictable. But so that's just an analogy, I think, of why sometimes I'll even use that, we are walking a near psychotic experience all the time in this culture. The culture of fear.
Yeah.
And some of us are handling that more or less okay, and that's okay, but then just put the right conditions on. Boom. And so I think your experience, even, as a clinician, and your own personal experience, et cetera, will be very valuable to understanding, okay, what does it actually mean to walk with this fear, experiencing this terror, the dread, and even the paralyzation that can go with it. It's really a type of mental psychic soul illness I believe we're in right now. I believe we're in a soul illness.
Mm.
I like the idea of transmission that you threw out.
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about transmitting a virus and trying not to transmit a virus. So what else are we transmitting around fear? What are we transmitting emotionally, mentally, psychically anyway? And so what are we transmitting unconsciously?
Yeah.
And what can we consciously transmit?
So I think
Positively.
So you've used the word unconscious, just if I pick up on that. I started thinking about, because we do need to walk through what a second tier might be and how we sort of define that in terms of a spiral dynamic of development. Because you said, I want to know, where am I at in my development, you opened, in being with fear, in having a relationship with fear. Where am I at in my development? And because we're using this spiral dynamic structure, we actually can kind of map out or get some sense of where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's an evolutionary model, right? It's a developmental evolutionary model of what I'm going to just call fear management systems. And I know you know enough about that in your background. People can read about that. I can put links to that in the video. And I'll even go through a bit of a diagram at some point in one of the videos.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah, to show, this notion that we actually have capacity to access certain fear management systems, and I just called them from 0 to 9, which coordinate, right, with the evolution of consciousness levels or stages. And in Ken Wilber's work and others, 9 to 10 stages of development are fairly well recognizable from, very early childhood, if a person keeps developing, to what we could call non-dual awareness, which I put at the highest level of fear management system that we know of on the planet. And that is, quote, fearless management system. See, I didn't talk about an individual, but I said an individual could access that fear management system. It's like a meme, right? So we have the notion of cultural memes in spiral dynamics. We give them colors, we give them names, and most people, the average we often talk about, are operating in a mythic membership, consciousness, or meme. And that's all about belonging to, conforming to, and then individuating from that meme. I'm sort of starting halfway in the spiral of 9. We can move more into an autonomy, right, into a even post-rational, and onward all the way up to non-dual. So I will show a map of that, but I don't want to start with that right now. I want to really get a sense of what would it mean for me to have a relationship with fear in and through fear management systems, not in and through techniques of how to manage fear.
Yeah.
That's one set of way to relate to fear. And then what if I actually had a mapping of fear management systems, and then I could figure out how to relate myself in and through those systems? Core to that second tier is what I really call fearlessness. That's where fearlessness truly starts as a system. Even though I'd say the spirit of fearlessness is in all the memes. It's in all the developments from the moment we're conceived. When fear appears, so then does fearlessness. Mm-hmm. But will we notice the fearlessness? We tend to notice the fear symptoms. They get our attention. All discipline practices that I know of mindfulness, of the yoga traditions, of the meditation traditions, of focus traditions, any kind of really good psychotherapy about attention, disciplining our attention, is really trying to get us to not pay attention to the fear symptoms overly so.
Yeah. Not dwell on it.
Yeah, so acknowledge it, not deny it, but also don't focus on it. Because what you focus on, you'll get, right? That'll continue to stay your experience, bodily, emotionally, chemically, energetically, electromagnetically. So that's what I think, that's the beautiful thing about the spiral, if I would, just to give us some structure, is these developmental levels that we can mature through. And that's what I heard you were saying. Where is my maturation right now? As I'm in this very intense, almost near psychotic, cultural collective experiencing, a type of death.
Mm-hmm.
It's paralyzing death if you really think about what's going on at one level. And you watch people's reaction, their eyeballs, their discourse, the way they talk. It's like, okay, like, yeah, we're in trouble. And we don't know where it's going. Really terrifying when we don't know where it's going. That's like a psychotic breakdown.
Yeah.
Starting to break, starting to crack. All those familiar structures, ontologically, supportively, that I thought was myself, that I thought was the ground of being. And boom, boom, I don't even know where this is going. I don't know if I'm going to even be able to handle this without going nuts.
Well, and what happens is there's the breaking open of the outer layers, which reveals the brokenness or
vulnerability.
Yeah, of the inner layers, where there are incomplete developments and there are frozen traumatic material where there's, yeah.
I like that. So
parts.
Yeah, so this systems approach, I'm jumping around a bit just because I'm just touching pieces. There's so many to deal with. We want to get as much completeness as we can if you want to keep maturing yourself and your relations to the world. And the world needs to mature collectively. We want to pay attention to as much as we can, not as little as we can. But that means not just paying attention to fear symptoms.
Yeah.
You can pay attention to a whole lot more fear symptoms. Just turn on the news. Just listen to your neighbors.
Yeah.
Listen to your own mind, your own subconscious throwing up. What if, oh my God. What if the economic system crashes?
Yeah.
So Barbara and I, just in our own very particular experience, the first thing I said is, we have to bracket our experience, which means don't just randomly go off seeking new information about the coronavirus and what's going on and what the government's doing and so on. Do it, but do it in a very particular way, with only in a certain particular time frame in your day rhythm.
Yeah.
Control your own rhythm. Otherwise you will be caught in the swirl of the other psychotic to neurotic rhythm.
Yeah, the overwhelm.
It will be
on overwhelm.
Yeah, and I could just be overwhelmed just like anybody else.
Yeah.
Because this is new to me. I've never had such a powerful collective experience. And yet I have all this experience. So here's the good part. I want to pay more attention to, in this time, to how fear management works. We've actually now got time. So this is the great educational frame for humanity. Well, we know the fear is going on. We can distract ourselves, play games, do all the personal stuff, which is great too. In this time, we're not doing our normal routines, but I said, this is the educational time. So that's why your email is like, oh, somebody actually wants to improve their education. They want to reflect on it. They want to teach themselves. They want to teach with others, learn with others. This is the time. What could be a better content?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could worry about your economics and all those things, which you will. That's going to all be part of the crises. But what a time. And this is, I think you would probably say to anyone. I know Marianne Williamson says it. She says, in my working with people, the best movement, the best work I get is when people are in deep crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now the whole society, the world, deep crisis. So that's the first framing. So the systems I want to pay attention to now is what fear management systems are accessible that I could possibly utilize now. In other words, every one of those fear systems that developed from 0 to 9, as I say, 0 being pre-birth, then coming out the womb into first fear management system 1, which is kind of survival.
Mm-hmm.
Fear management system 2, having a relationship with those around you, like, this gets a little more complex, that starts to be informed by certain kinds of symbols, magical symbols, things that have power, like a doll, a teddy bear. We're starting to go into another world there, which is sometimes called the fear management system 2, I would call it. So again, I'm not going to go through all those today per se, but I'm just trying to get why the system is actually where we can put our thinking to, our attention to, other than just the fear symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Well, the fear management systems, in my theory, the integral theory, and I think it fits the integral theory very nicely. It says that each fear management system is an adaptive, it's like a universal set of adaptive principles and operations that work really good for certain conditions and certain level of cognitive development of where the organism is at, right? It's both conditions, all those complexities, that's that ecology, and then it's its internal environment, which has got to do with its emotional, cognitive, moral, all those lines of development on the inside. And they are adapting to the conditions that it needs to.
Mm-hmm.
And then, conditions change, and that's why we evolve. And we need another new system when the old one isn't working so well for the conditions. So that's systems theory, really, in a nutshell. And why we want to go back and re-look at all those systems that have developed in humanity's entire cultural history. And the argument is there's probably 9 fear management systems that we actually have evolved on this planet through historical time. Mm-hmm. That is wisdom.
Yeah.
That is our ancestry. A lot of people are doing ancestry work now, I've noticed. It's really taking off. And from a fear management point of view, I would say, look at your ancestral fear management systems that got you here, that got humans to where we are, so-called in progress evolution. Now's the time to learn them, recognize them, and then say, oh, yeah, gee, I kind of missed that one, right? I didn't develop my magical fear management system 2 very well. Well, fear management system 2, magical, is really good at handling fear. It makes sense of fear within magical connections. Things that are life-threatening, right? Like a disease or a poison. Mm-hmm. And it brings out certain kind of symptoms. Then the shaman, it would be a classic example of someone who is really working the fear management system for the people, for the tribe, goes out and finds resources in nature, or even from the underworlds, overworlds, other worlds in the invisible world, and finds out connections of where parts are missing, brings them back to wholeness. So the entire magical fear management system, as I began to study the indigenous teachings, particularly with Foro's experience with the shamans in Mexico, he said everything in their fear management system was working in the magical, associative, pre-rational thinking processes, for the most part, to bring back together wholeness in the community, in your wholeness in your relationship with nature, and wholeness within your own soul, right? Your own connection interiorly. So that's a psychology and kind of fear management system too. And I've always argued fundamentally all those practices, right? Psychological practices, spiritual practices, we could call them ritual practices, more or less are all working to give us a good foundation of fear management. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't get your fear management down well and integrated, the next one is love, management. The next one's freedom management on top of that. This is your defense system. This is number one. This is what experiences the threats of the world. So that, to me, brings fear into the defense intelligence system. You know, we don't even have to use the word fear. We could be talking about defense intelligence systems, the 9 defense intelligence systems that have evolved. I use fear just because people recognize the word. I don't necessarily think it's the best word, even, because it's sort of corrupted. Fear is so corrupted and used against us often, right? It's like,
yeah, and it's got so many different meanings. The semantics are just so complex and broad. But defense intelligence systems have that feels much more relatable and particular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so even things like, you know, fight, flight, freeze, which we call these fear responses in psychology, right? And those are really important in the work, you know, I know you do with trauma therapy, is to actually see that all of those, I'm sure you would agree, those are defenses. Yes, they're defenses because once you can kind of utilize the defenses and create boundaries and borders with the world that is threatening, there's a threatening world out there to living organisms. We're susceptible. Then you can build the attachment back to the love source that's been fragmented. So you really got to deal with that defense system as well as the love system. So you can't just teach about love and how to love your parents and how to go back through your ancestors and find where what's so-called the healthy ancestors in your line. I says, well, that's good, but you've also better learn out who are the warriors in your line who defended healthily. Not just were loving, not just were nurturing. They were learning to fight, you know, whether it's the viruses, the fires, the predators, the volcanoes, all of the circumstances that will destroy life. And to do it not in fear, right? To really do it in the spirit of fearlessness is what I say. So all these fear management systems have the intelligence of fearlessness in them. What does fearlessness just mean? If we could just define it and help me here, Jan, because you've been around me for a long time, you might put different words on how I have many different definitions for fearlessness, but right in the moment, I'll just pick something to say. And fearlessness is the same as self-regulation.
Yeah.
If we deregulate under distress, under the conditions of impingement on a living system, that system will go into some dysregulation processes, right? Trying to adapt. And then if it gets enough of the pressure that just keeps coming, we're not allowed to self-regulate enough. So we get over distressed. Now it's not just stress, now it's distress. And then we get hurt by that. And our immune system's compromised under that pressure. So you're starting to go down. You're starting to have the existential experience of, I may not make it through this. And I would say that's absolutely natural to feel that and experience that. That you're dying. You're dying. You're vulnerable. You could go down. But then the beauty of the natural fearlessness, what I kind of call the natural fearlessness that's available, it is always that says, well, when fear and distress appear, my system starts to pump up its immune system. It starts to do all kinds of processes of natural responses to the distress. We have a whole parasympathetic nervous system. It's half of our nervous system, right, is for reacting to the stressors, and the other half is to bring us down out of the stressors. That is the spirit of fearlessness. So again, I'm using the language of fearlessness just because fear is the language of fear management systems. So I want to say they're all made of fearlessness. That's at their core. The beauty of that is a very positive model. Fear is not, how could you make fear negative when when fear appears, so does the spirit of fearlessness.
Yeah.
There's no way to make that a negative model. That's the holistic system, right? I just made it a system. Stressors and response to stressors, if you just want to use that really simple language. Now, the complexity of the spiral dynamics and the integral model that we're using makes that much more complex, because it basically says that system will have to evolve to a more complex system to handle more complex brain development, more complex societies that were starting to change. We went from tribal cultures to agricultures to urban culture. There are new fear management systems required, right? Evolutionarily through those processes. So now we've got cultural evolution. We've got cultural fear management systems. If I go back to 4 arrows for a moment, here's a complexity in this systems model, this systems of ecology. It all sounds pretty good when I was just at levels 1 and 2, and maybe 3. Once you get to about level 4 in cultural history of the evolution of humankind, which is really the agricultural development, and others have argued, we started moving from partnership cultures that were really healthily integrated well, right? And we often call it the indigenous ways, really integrated culture well with natural, cultural, even the spiritual dimension. They're really quite one. There's a wonderful universality. You'd get, little bits of pathologies and dissociations and traumas that would, cause some problems. Yes, indeed. But it wasn't until Fear Management System 4, and some, you could argue that's 10 to 12,000 years ago, with the development of agriculture, and then empires started coming from agriculture societies.
Right.
The culture became what I call a fear matrix. Rihanna Eisler, in her archaeology studies, in a feminist perspective, right, she called that the transition from partnership cultures in those early to now we're in dominator cultures.
Yeah.
So all the fear management systems after that are really toxic, potentially. Doesn't mean they don't have the spirit of fearlessness. Doesn't mean they don't have some really good operative adaptational capacities. Fear management system 4, 5, 6, 7. But they have a huge ongoing influx of this kind of psychotic or paranoid culture. That's why they're dominating cultures. That's why she called them dominator cultures, often connected with what was called pathological patriarchy.
Well, and then from a holographic viewpoint, then you take the individual, and the individual who's a dominator leader in leading his country, leading his family, leading his business, that paranoia is absolutely integral to that dominator system. That is a fuel that motivates a great deal of that drive to dominate, drive to fear-mongering, to be able to dominate. And you talk about that psychotic, so that fragmented, that doesn't actually see, or that will talk to the system, talk to the community and say, everything's fine. We're all good. Everything's fine.
We're not
you
always...
don't need to know. Oh, but there is crisis, and you should be afraid, and you should blame them, and it. And defend yourself, and I can help you do that.
And we're not only good, we're great.
Yeah.
They're trying to pull us down from our greatness.
Yeah.
This is the deep paranoid. So this is where all fear management systems have, I've been describing how they're self-regulating, right? They have this capacity for a healthy balancing, we'll just call it culture, and psychic experience individually as well. They're very supportive. That's great for our evolution. And at the same time, any one of those fear management systems can become pathological more or less. So that's the other part of systems theory. when the system can't catch up to regulate under the intensity of the pressure of deconstruction or, violence, or just catastrophes that are going on. And so they're all vulnerable. It doesn't matter when. The argument in why would I want to mature and develop to access higher and higher level of development, on this spiral, is you'll have more resilience the higher up you can access. Doesn't mean you won't get attacked and you won't really have issues and really difficult situations. It just means you will have more resilience because you're able to access not only, let's say, system 5, but then you can also access 4, 3, 2, 1, because they're all integrated, right? Include the intelligence of all 1, 2, 3, 4 is included in 5, but there is always the transcendent. But 5 goes to places that those other ones just couldn't see. They couldn't even, inform us of.
Yeah, and in this world of virus, the immunity to the virus and the herd immunity that we're hearing about, right? Individual immunity after you get the virus, herd immunity after a large group of people get the virus, builds the resilience.
Oh, yeah, good.
And so that's what I'm hearing you talk about with regard to dealing with, deconstruction, with crisis.
Yeah. And really the simple word existential is death. Dealing with the threat of death.
Yeah.
Everything in evolution ultimately is, how well are you developing your fear of death, which is your fear of life.
Yes.
A lot of people don't want to advance and mature because they're too afraid of life. And why are they afraid of life? It's because their fear of death is so extreme. They're constantly afraid of losing life. So why would you want to go for more life? Because you're always afraid you're going to lose it. So you want to try to trap yourself in, well, I don't want more life and I don't want more death, so I'll just try to hang out here.
Just try to hold it, yeah. Hold it still.
That to me is very interesting in the psychotic freeze experience. The what's the term for shutdown in the psychotic?
Freeze.
There's a clinical
association.
Term. It's part of a dissociation, but I just forget in the moment. But there is a clinical term for it. Anyways, it's a paralyzation.
The dysregulation of that's systematic. I know what you mean. Anyway,
shut down, right? It's lockdown. It's shut down. This is the really. Yeah. Wouldn't it have been fascinating if our leaders, right, from all the health industry, experts and so on, when they came in to think about the pandemic, what would have happened if they wouldn't have used the word lockdown or shutdown? What happens if they actually just said, we're going to move into this defensive strategies and here they are and this is what we're going to do, without ever mentioning the word lockdown or shutdown? Do you see the trigger that is? That to me is a deep trigger of this psychotic. It is actually a psychotic system afraid of locking down. And it's afraid of being shut down. It's afraid of dying. So it's spreading so much fear in using that terminology. Never mind the actual sense of imprisonment that we experience through martial law and all the other kinds of uses of law. So this is where language and words become so important in understanding systems. And when we talk about fear management systems, why I like it so much that you said I want to talk about systems is, let's not keep talking about fear over and over and over and over again. That's really re-stimulating.
Yeah.
And not always in a good way. It can be, if you use a little of it, it could be catalyzing and stimulating. But when you're constantly getting it, using it, see, it's that repetition. There's your neuroses right there. And then that will just keep dissociating the system from regulating. It's too rapid. It's too repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
So fear management systems breaks us out of that talk. So this is a fear talk about fear management systems to break us out of that talk that encourages, by aim, by design, the fear management system talk, it encourages fearlessness. It doesn't encourage paying attention to fear symptoms, just in case I missed some data. Just in fact, somebody's said something and the new law is, quite frankly, I operate, if there's a new law out, I'll eventually probably hear about it. I'm not going to go looking for what the new law is because they're changing them all the time and they're totally out of my control. So I'm not going to put my intelligence on the end of their rope of jacking me around and manipulating me what the next law is that I'm supposed to obey. So I'm just giving you one strategy of what I would call at the second tier is I really pick carefully where I channel inputs, right? Really give yourself those healthy boundaries because the system is quite psychotic. It will do anything, it will jump on anything, and it's reacting out of the shutdown shock and awe tactic. Shock and awe people enough with this constant changing of the next danger, the next, there's now 6,000 cases in, and people are like watching these numbers.
Yeah.
I would never do that.
Yeah, every news station opens that way with the numbers of infected and numbers dead.
Oh, yeah, lovely.
World, national, and local.
Isn't that educative?
Oh. Yeah.
So you see, we are really now, it's so great on the downside, but the upside, downside is great of the enormity of suffering. But this is where we're moving to this so-called silver lining of fearlessness, moving into a different kind of fear talk, if we will. Let's just say a word about intro before we go, this Fear Management System 7. So the first tier systems is what you opened with, and those go from what I call 0 to 6. And that again fits the spiral dynamics model of memes, cultural memes. It fits Ken Wilber's models of consciousness levels more or less as well. Robert Keegan's developmental levels of the self fit these two. There's many developmental schemes, so they're pretty universal. There's probably a lot of truth in using these, not all the truth. And anyways, the first 6 systems, the argument of the theory that I use is that they all are more or less fear-based, more than 50%. So maybe it's 51, maybe it's 80, but more or less there's more fear-based. And of course, when you get down to the very early ones, they're probably much more free of that fear base, but that's a little sort of subtle detail. The reason is there's accumulating hurt and fear as you develop through time. Healing processes are not adequate. If you do not live in a healing culture, society, you're just more or less getting inducted into the hall of the fear matrix.
Yeah.
And it really starts at Fear Management System 4. And that matrix becomes very intense and controls just about everything. Again, not everything, but just about, I said. The paranoid culture, the dominator culture, right? So that takes us up to that first tier. And those are pretty recognized, and several researchers have confirmed there's a jump or an abyss or a gap to get to the next level of adaptive systems.
From 4 to 5, you mean?
From 6 to 7.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what okay.
So that's where you and I were. Well, what we know what that would look like under there, more or less. And that's all the management books and teachings and the way the government operates and so on, and how to control using fear tactics and so on, fear mongering. So this is where we'll start, in our next video, is we'll probably start to really, well, what would that really look like? Going from 6 especially, which is, we grew up in the human potential movement, the new age, the higher consciousness community, fear management 6, postmodern green meme, and then the mean green meme and how it's trying to manage fear, and yet right on the cusp, right, to making that jump to the second tier. And I think that's what you and I are attempting to do, is just help understand that, and then how to make that transition more. What are the practices and guidance from that second tier?
That's where I think with a certain amount of groundwork or information, on the development in those first 6. A certain amount of groundwork there that has to come before, just like to move to that second tier.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have integrated all that stuff, that integration that didn't occur in our attachment at age 3 to what didn't occur when we were 17, and just about moving to that next developmental level, and something got frozen there. So to have a ground, a extensive ground of not just information, but of embodiment,
Mm-hmm.
of fear, our relationship with fear that is here, that is not back here pushing me around, but that is here. I go, yes, no, maybe. And then to move on to that second tier, a fear management system in second tier, that is healthy second tier, is more than just a management system.
It is.
Much more.
And the beauty is it sees the value and all the other ones that are above it.
Yes.
And it sees all the earlier ones that it was built upon. This is a total breakthrough difference of fear management system intelligence that opens in the second tier.
Yeah.
It's a different world. And gosh, I experienced some of it, and I'd certainly like a lot more people to be able to access that. Thank you for pushing this discussion toward that direction.
Yeah, in future talks, we'll flesh that out some more, what that second tier fearlessness system will look like, or might look like, and we can create and imagine, and maybe even get comments and contributions from others that are part of the imaginary of what a fearlessness system would look like, which is second tier.
And that's such a good ending, because it's an educative model. It's not a prescriptive model. In other words, this has not all been worked out.
No, and it's artistic. It's creative. Emergent, that's the buzzword.
Emergent is I think the right word, and that brings us to, how do we develop an emergent, multiple dimensional self that can traverse the multiple complexities of this ecology, not just one little simple self that somehow is supposed to manage the whole world. That probably is not going to work anymore.
Yeah, that's what the spiral dynamics folks call the spiral wizard. Yeah, that sees the value in everyone at the table, but also sees who should not be leading.
At certain times.
At certain times, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
Until the next time.
Bye-bye.